Hi everyone, we're continuing our series of videos on beginner chess here on my chess notebook. The purpose of this video is to compare the strengths of the different types of pieces and decide which pieces are better than which. So here you're looking at the starting position of a game of chess, and each side has 8 pawns, 2 rooks, 2 knights, 2 bishops, a queen, and a king. Now you know the object of a game of chess is to win your opponent's king. We call that checkmate. But along the way, you inevitably will be taking some of your opponent's pieces and they will be taking some of yours. And often you're going to be making trades, giving up a piece to win a piece. And you may wonder, is giving up a bishop a good idea if I get a knight in return? Or is giving up 2 rooks a good idea in order to get a queen in return? Well, in order to answer these types of questions, a point system has been devised in order to compare the relative strengths of the pieces. The strongest piece on the board, as you might guess, is the queen. And we'll symbolize queen with capital Q, and a queen is worth 9 points in our standard point system. The next most powerful piece on the board is the rook, and a rook is worth 5 points in our point system. Next comes the bishop, which is worth 3 points. Then the knight. Now this is funny. A knight is spelled with a K, but in chess we use a capital N all the time to denote a knight, because a king also starts with a K, so we use the second letter of knight to denote it. Well, a knight is also worth 3 points in this system. However, in most cases, bishops are slightly worth more than knights. So a bishop, some people say, is worth something like 3 1/3 points, versus a knight, which is worth 3 points, something like that. So this isn't perfect. And at the bottom of the list, we have the pawn. And the pawn is worth the standard 1 point. Now, missing from this list, you can see, is the king. The reason we don't put the king in the point system is because both sides always have a king. You can't trade your king. It's always there to the end of the game. Okay, you may wonder, where does this point system come from? How do we know rooks are better than bishops, for example? And how do we know bishops are worth about the same as a knight? Well, let's explore that question. Okay, I'm going to go to a blank board here, and we'll put a bishop in the middle of the board, and we'll discuss the powers of the bishop. Well, when a bishop is in the middle of the board, there are several squares it can travel to. I'll highlight them all. These are the squares the bishop can reach in one move. It can reach, any of those squares. There are 13 if you count them. If you put a bishop away from the center, it doesn't have as much mobility, we say. It doesn't go to as many squares, not 13. Let's count them. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So when you get away from the center, the mobility decreases. Let's move it toward a corner, like right here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. The mobility has decreased to 7. So bishops are at their most mobile when they're near the center of the board, and they're at their least mobile when they're at the corner of the board. Now, bishops are pretty powerful because they can move as far as you would like them to move. They can move from here all the way to there, for example, so they can get all the way across the board. But bishops have their limitations too. This bishop that you see here is on a dark square. Well, it can only remain on dark squares throughout the whole game because it always travels on diagonals, and it's never going to be able to reach half of the squares on the board. So that's one of the limitations of a bishop. Now let's compare that to a knight. Let's put a knight here in the middle of the board. Now, in the middle of the board, a knight has 8 different squares it can reach in one move. That's fewer squares than a bishop could reach. A bishop in the center could reach 13. So a knight doesn't have as much mobility as a bishop. And when you put the knight on the edge of the board, the mobility really decreases. Here it can only reach 4 squares, and if you put it all the way in the corner, it can reach only 2 squares. So overall, knights are less mobile than bishops. Knights are also shorter range pieces. For example, let's say we had a bishop and a knight on the bottom edge of the board, and they had a race to get to the top. Well, the bishop could make it to the top of the board in 2 moves. The knight would take 1, 2, 3, 4 moves to get to the top. So knights are shorter range pieces than bishops. So it sounds like I'm making a case that bishops are stronger than knights because of their greater mobility. But hang on. Remember, a bishop can only reach half of the squares on the board. A knight can reach all of them. A knight starting on a dark square moves to a light square, then to a dark square, then to a light square. It can reach squares of both colors, and you can practice moving a knight around and reach every single square on the board. So that's one thing a knight has over a bishop. Another thing a knight has over a bishop is that knights can jump over pieces. Pieces do not block them. But if there are pieces or pawns in the way of a bishop, then they're going to have to move first in order to let the bishop pass. All right, so both of these pieces have their pluses and minuses. Bishops are farther ranging pieces with more mobility. Knights have less mobility. They're shorter range pieces, but knights can reach every square on the board and they can jump over pieces. So experience has taught us that these pieces are approximately equal. We will learn in future videos that in some cases bishops are preferable, and in other cases knights are preferable, depending on how the position on the board looks, depending on what's going on in the game. Okay, but a simple rule of thumb is they're about equal. Okay, so let's compare a bishop to a rook to understand why a rook is more powerful than a bishop. Okay, if we put a rook in the center of the board, it has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14 squares it could reach. If you put a rook anywhere on the board, even on the edge or in the corner, it still has 14 squares it can reach. 7 squares in its row and 7 squares in its column. So the mobility of a rook never changes. It always has the same range no matter where it's at. Remember, the bishop was most mobile in the center of the board, and when you bring it toward an edge or a corner, it becomes less mobile. Well, rooks don't become less mobile when they get to an edge or a corner. So they have that merit over bishops. But there's a couple more merits that rooks have over bishops. A rook can draw a line that I like to call a wall that an enemy king cannot pass. This enemy king can approach here, but it can't get across this wall because kings are not allowed to walk into check, and the rook has these 3 squares covered. Now, a bishop cannot build a wall like that. If there is a bishop on the board, it builds a diagonal wall, you might say, but it's always possible to slip through a diagonal wall. The bishop cannot stop a king from crossing its path. So rooks build a stronger wall than bishops do. There's another important difference between having a rook versus having a bishop. Let's put the kings on the board as well as a white rook. It turns out that if this is the way a game goes, down to a king and rook versus a king, then the side with the rook can checkmate the side without the rook. All that has to happen is the black king here needs to be driven to the edge of a board, and that's something we're going to practice in a future video. And the king needs to be in front of it like this, and the king has these three squares controlled. The rook just needs to make its way to the edge now to check the king from the side, and now the rook has these squares controlled. So that rook is putting the king in check, and the king has no escape squares. So that rook and king are cooperating here to cause a checkmate. The bishop is not powerful enough to checkmate the black king. You could try to even set up the pieces into the best position possible for a checkmate, and you won't be able to do it. Perhaps you put the black king in the corner of the board where it has only 3 possible escape squares that you have to cover. Well, in the corner of the board, the bishop will have to check it, and it can control the square diagonally in front of the king there, but the white king cannot control both of these squares. So here, the bishop is calling check, and the king is helping, but the black king does have an escape square. And there's no way to arrange these pieces in order to checkmate the black king. So a bishop can't checkmate, but a rook can. That means a rook is more powerful than a bishop. It's more mobile. It builds these more solid walls along rows or columns rather than along diagonals, and it can checkmate the black king. So I think I've convinced you that rooks are worth more than bishops, and experience has shown that a rook is worth about 5 points compared to a bishop's 3 points. Okay, so that leaves the queen. Well, we know a queen has to be more powerful than a rook because it moves like a rook plus like a bishop. You might guess it has the combined score of a rook and a bishop, but it's not quite the same to have all the powers concentrated in one piece, the queen acts like a rook and a bishop together, than it is to have those powers in separate pieces, a rook and a bishop. There's no real logical reason why a rook and a bishop need to have the same combined value as a queen. It's close. If you add the value of the rook to the value of the bishop, it adds up to 8. But experience has shown a queen is a little bit better than a rook and a bishop. If black had a rook and a bishop and white had a queen, white is doing a little bit better than black. Okay, so queens are very powerful. So these numbers are worth remembering as far as trades go. So now you know if you want to trade a bishop for a knight, consider that about an equal trade. Or if you want to trade a bishop and 2 pawns for a rook, consider that an equal trade. Bishop plus 2 pawns is 5 points, and a rook is 5 points. All right, let's take a look at a position of a game in progress, right here. So let's determine who has the greater number of points in the position. Now, I should stress that chess has nothing to do with points in its rules. There are no rules concerning points. You're not trying to win points, you're simply trying to checkmate your opponent. So a point count is just a guideline to help you decide who's winning, who's losing, and how to make trades. But even then, it's not a perfect guideline because you could be winning a game of chess even though your points add up to much less than your opponent's points. Okay, so there are some caveats to say in this point system. Okay, but let's add things up here. Now, you could add up how many points each side has on the board, or you could figure out how many points each side has lost. Usually it depends. If there's a lot of pieces on the board, you're going to count how many points each side has lost. If there are just a few pieces on the board, you're going to count how many points are left on the board. Well, in this case, let's count how many pieces have been lost. Okay, so this is good practice. We don't see the pieces on the side of the board like we do in a physical game, so we're going to have to determine what has been lost here. Well, let's look at black first. So black is missing a queen that's worth 9 points. Black is missing a knight that's worth 3 points. And black is missing a pawn that's worth 1 point. So there is a queen missing, a knight missing, and a pawn missing for a total of 13 points missing. Let's see how many points white is missing. Okay, so white has the queen, but it's missing a rook. There's only one white rook on the board. So a rook is missing worth 5 points. There's only one bishop on the board, so a bishop is missing. That's worth 3 points. There's only one knight on the board, so a knight is missing. That's worth 3 points. And there are 5 pawns left on the board. That means 3 pawns are missing for 3 more points. If we add all that up, it adds up to 14 points. So white is missing 14 points and black is missing only 13 points. So black is doing a little bit better in the point count. Okay. Doesn't mean necessarily black is winning or is going to win the game, but it is just a quick way to compare the different pieces that have been captured on the board. Okay, so I would memorize this piece count value system if I were you and think about it when you make trades. All right, that's it for this video. Thank you for watching.